Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 628 for March 17th, 2025, and I'm Jaden Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm very excited to get into this week's show. We got a lot to dive into. I am fresh off a small little vacation to Walt Disney World.
Is that ever a small trip?
No, I mean, these days, it cost you your mortgage, your first child, and about $5,000 on top of that. It's
oh, wow,
insane.
That's it?
Yeah. And we were just there a few days, let alone those that spent an entire week at Walt Disney World. And it is interesting, all joking aside, we went during what should be a really busy time at Disney World. It is March, so the weather is wonderful.
That must be perfect for that, yeah.
It's great. It's not too warm, but it's obviously not cold either. It's spring break, so you have all the spring breakers there as well. But it's not crowded. That's not crowded.
Weird. That is weird. So I guess those going on spring break are not necessarily going to Disney World when they go to Florida.
Well, and here's why. Disney has outpriced itself. That's where we're at right now.
That does not surprise me at all.
It is, look, I joke about it costing a mortgage, but I don't know.
You also don't joke about that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it costs.
It's more of a hyperbolic truth at this point.
Yes. I mean, we get in-state discounts, which is partially why we're able to go as often as we do. And we don't have to buy a plane ticket. It's just a few hours up the road. So it's a little gas money. And we're able to save a little bit here and there. But for those across the country, across the globe, if you want to come down here, you have all the travel expenses and the tickets, the pricing, the gouging at the parks has gotten out of control. Obviously, that's not exclusively a Disney problem, but I think Disney World and its pricing has gotten to a point where it only draws a certain audience. For those in the middle, financially, economically, you can't go.
It's a hard sell now. It's a hard sell.
You cannot go.
Especially because that was the thing. I don't know if it was like this for you at your age, but when people went to Disney World when they were younger and they went with their families, the thing was to spend a week there. That was kind of the thing, right? You can't really do that anymore without going broke, right?
Yeah, it's gone out of hand. And I've been able to see this trend almost in real time because we do go every year. A lot of years we go multiple times.
Yeah. Well, you even went, you went more often when you were still living in Gainesville, right?
When we lived in Gainesville, which was an hour down the road, we had yearly passes and were there a dozen times a year during those years.
Yeah. You could practically walk to Disney World.
Yeah, and you can tell the difference from those Gainesville years where there were some weekends you could barely walk through the pathways. It was so packed and crowded. And now, like even the park's most popular rides,
that's kind of sad.
The line is maybe an hour, which isn't that bad.
That's not that bad for a theme park ride like that. That's not bad. I remember back in the day when I was going, I had to wait like half the day just to ride the Rock and Roller Coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, even just 5 years ago to go on some of those bigger rides, you're looking at 2 hours for a lot of the day. And now it's really not much of a wait. I
That's
mean,
insane.
depends on the
That's insane.
time of the day and time of the year. You know, they're like, for example, when we first got to Magic Kingdom this last weekend in the morning, Tron, the new Tron ride,
Yeah.
it did get up to about 2 hours initially in the early morning because that's the
Okay.
first thing everyone wants to do, right?
Right. They want to get
It's
that
the
out of the
big
way.
ride.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to go and get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Rest of the day after that opening surge, an hour max.
That's
to get on that ride.
Yeah. So the last time I was in Disney, I was still in high school, and at that time, if you went to Epcot, the big ride at the time was Soarin'. If you remember the ride, Soarin'.
Yeah, we went on
that
Soarin'.
was the exact same thing. People went there first. They went on that one first because they wanted to not miss out. And by the time you got to like maybe 3 or 4 p.m., it maybe took 30 minutes to get on that ride.
Yeah. So the numbers are dwindling. There's no doubt about it. And then there's the whole Disney Star Wars hotel debacle that everyone is aware of at this point.
Yeah, Galaxy's Edge. There's a whole story there that we don't have the time to get into now.
It's crazy. But can I tell quickly before we get into the show a deeply embarrassing story from over the weekend?
Is this what I think it
Speaking of
is?
Tron.
Is this what? Okay, I'm ready for this.
So this is an accumulation of a bunch of things. It is me loving my kids and doing fun things with them. It's me being a fan of cinema. It's me being a fan of musical scores.
Yeah.
All of that coalesces into this incredible moment in Magic Kingdom this last Saturday where we go to get on the new Tron ride. And I've been on it once before. It's really, really great. So I already knew what to expect. Ironically, this was early in the morning, but that's when our fast pass was. So we got to go right up. We didn't really have to wait. Thankfully, we skipped the 2-hour line.
Okay.
But we get in there, and I really like Tron Legacy, maybe more than a lot of other people.
I think that's a pretty underrated movie. That's a
Yes.
very intriguing movie, at least visually.
I agree.
I kind of dig it. I kind of dig it.
And it's only grown on me more since its release. I've rewatched it a couple of times in the last few years. I have a lot of fun with it. I think it's quite good. It's not great, but I think it's a lot of fun. It knows what kind of movie it is. The set design, the production design, the suits, it's all really cool. And
I agree.
The score from Daft Punk just freaking rocks. It's so great. So great.
I miss them so much. I
I
Daft
know.
Punk.
Me too. Me too.
They'll make a surprise comeback at some point soon. As you
Yeah.
know, they've announced that they are no longer together, which is probably why. I'll let you finish this story, and then I'll jump in with my own version of it regarding Daft Punk. I'll say.
Love Daft Punk, especially that score. So once you get to the ride, that score or a version of it is playing when you get there. And it is it immediately sets a tone. It's really fantastic. And the design of the ride, the aesthetics, they did a great job with it. It's really, really fun. And you get inside and you get ready to get on the bike. And it's one of those where it's like an actual bike and you're like leaning forward on it. And I go to get on this ride and I'm next to my first son, Sam. And he's so excited. Like you can see the palpable joy on his face as we're like getting ready to go on this ride.
Yeah.
And as soon as the ride begins, you go up to this little platform. It does like a really quick countdown and then you're off. And it shoots off like a bat out of hell. It is an incredible, like the first 15 seconds of that ride is some of the best I've ever experienced. It's really, really incredible.
That is awesome.
And what's really great about, so like it starts inside and that first shoots you out. You kind of go outside a little bit and you kind of zoom around. And as you zoom around and you come up, what's really great, and this is where the nerd gets in, comes out of me a little bit. So you're like, there's the thrill of the ride, which is great. There's my son, Sam, like watching him experience that same thrill and just losing it himself. like that, like the father part of me comes out there as well. And then you couple that with, as you come around and you're zooming up back inside, you hear that freaking Daft Punk score playing. You hear it. And there's the digital sound of it as well. But you have these violins that are just going so hard that it makes me want to run through a freaking brick wall. Like, it is so good. So like the movie score nerd in me just erupts in that moment as well. And then there's just the cinematic feel of the ride that I think is really cool. And that's just really great. And like all of those things came together, and this is where it gets deeply embarrassing. So I'm watching my son have a great time, and just the father comes out of me, the score nerd comes out of me, the cinematic nerd comes out of me. And like, we're like halfway through this ride, and this is so organic. It's nothing that I can't help it.
Sure.
I can't help it. Like all of that erupts to the point where like I am like full on now I shouldn't say sobbing. Like I'm like crying tears of joy, but because you're on this ride, you're going so fast, the tears are just like flying off my face. Imagine so like kind of trickling down, but like flying off, and my face is just soaked in tears of joy.
And imagine what random people must have thought as you all got off that ride and they saw you like that. They thought, man, this guy must have been so scared.
I don't know. I I didn't take a picture. I don't know. I know I was grinning ear to ear.
I mean, I probably would have been crying during that ride for the wrong reasons, because it would have been about me mourning the loss of Daft Punk, that they're no longer a touring duo or an active duo, at least as of right now. So I would have been crying tears of sadness, but I don't. I mean, that's so you, JD. That kind of story is just so you. So while you say it's embarrassing, to me, this sounds like a Tuesday for you.
Yeah, I know. I immediately texted Brennan. I was like, "You're not going to believe this, or you will believe this."
Yeah, I'm not going to believe. Of course, I'm going to believe this.
But it was like
this deeply
tracks. Embarrassing. But one of those moments that was like just so quintessentially me, where it's just like I just like. I couldn't help myself. It was the cinema side of me and the father side of me, like just kind of combining to this incredible moment. It was so cool.
Sometimes so cool. Emotions are just overwhelming, right? And you have no response other than to just let it out in water form.
That's all I could do. And it was just kind of funny. Like I think I'm gonna have it cinched deep into my brain, that moment of knowing that I was crying because I could feel them sort of coming down, but mostly just flying off my face because we're going so fast on the ride. They're just immediately flying away.
If people were sitting behind you, they probably thought,
nobody was behind me.
Thank goodness, because they probably would have thought that this was Splash Mountain all of a sudden.
Yeah. Which we went on the new Splash Mountain, by the way, because they redid it from Song of the South to Princess and the Frog.
Right.
And they did a good job with it.
Oh, good. Good to hear.
Did a good job with that. I thought that was great. So
yeah, I've got to get back there.
At any rate, that's not really what we're here to talk about. We are going to be continuing our Best Picture movie series this week as we talk about the 1963 film Tom Jones, which was a first-time watch for me. I had never seen that film before.
Same here. So
I'll be curious to get into that. However, before we do, we have a fun exercise to begin the show. Steven Soderbergh, it is only March. It is, as I noted up at the top of the show, it is March 17th as we are recording this.
Yeah.
So we're really only 2.5 months into the year, and he's already had 2 films come out this year. The man is on a roll. If he keeps going at it, he might get to 4 or 5 by the end of the year, which is awesome.
Has that ever happened before?
That I don't know, but if anyone could pull that off, Soderbergh certainly could.
I know
he did talk about that, right? There were headlines earlier in the week about how he makes these really sharp, incisive, brisk 90-minute
movies. Yeah, he has this rhythm that he's saying, and he's working a lot with David Koepp and Ed Solomon as like this like collaborative partnership between both of them. They're on fire. They're absolutely on fire right now.
Absolutely. Presents, which came out in January, was awesome. Really, really fantastic. We will have a conversation on Black Bag coming out this week as well. So you can be on the lookout for that. I was not there for that conversation because I was at Disney, so I was a little late catching up to the film. But we will have a review for Black Bag coming out this week as well. Obviously, it hit theaters over the weekend. So with that as inspiration, Soderbergh having at least 2 films coming out this year, we wanted to look back at filmmakers who have also had 2 films come out in the same year.
Yep.
And there's been quite a few. In fact, from prominent directors, Steven Spielberg, the other Steven, has done this a couple of times. Ridley Scott has done this a couple of times. Martin Scorsese, Jeff Nichols, my beloved Jeff Nichols, Richard Linklater, Francis Ford Coppola, Mel Brooks, Ingmar Bergman, to name a few.
Yeah.
There have been several prominent directors to do this. And with some of them, we're talking like all-time movie stuff, which is really incredible.
We're talking about how the hell did a director do this in 1 year?
Yes. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
of course, they didn't make both films in the same year. They just happened to be released in these years. But
Exactly.
yeah, like when we talk about Spielberg, for instance, of course, he didn't shoot and direct Schindler's List and Jurassic Park all in 1993. There's a lot of pre-production work that had to go into those movies to get to where they ended up being. But still, they came out in the same year, which still proves how active these filmmakers were in a way that's just kind of unprecedented. It really is.
Absolutely. So we have a bunch of listed here, and we thought it would be fun to do a ranking, to do a collective ranking, which is something that Brendan and I do from time to time. And I thought it would be fun to discuss some of these, to select a top 10. You want to rank a top 10 here?
I was thinking because we have around 20 filmmakers. Well, we have maybe just under 20 filmmakers here, but we have at least 20 instances of double features that we can call these. Because as you said, Spielberg, Ridley Scott, and I guess even Steven Soderbergh now, to name a few, they've done this at least twice. Like they have at least 2 films where they've released 2 films in the same year, or 2 years where they've done this. So I think we have at least 20 options to consider. I think a top 10 seems to be the most the most efficient way of doing this.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be 2 phases to this conversation, because as Brendan noted, we have about 20 filmmakers who have done this in over the past several decades.
Yeah.
I think phase 1 will be narrowing it down to the 10. So we'll talk through a bunch of these and get to the 10, and then from there, rank those 10. I think that might be the easiest way to do this.
Probably. Yeah, and we'll also admit that there might be some blind spots for us here, but for the most part, I don't know about you, I've seen most of these movies. I've seen
most of these as well.
I've seen almost all of them that we can talk about here safely. But I think narrowing it down to what we think are the 10 best, what are we calling these? Annual double features, I guess.
I don't know. Phrasing is going to be interesting here.
What's marketable? Yeah.
Pair, duo. I don't know. But we are, and here's the other thing
just
too.
Don't stop working.
Just to be clear on this, we are treating the year, the director, and the 2 films that came out in the same year. That is one entity.
Yes.
So, for example, Francis Ford Coppola, 1974, The Conversation, and The Godfather Part 2. Hell of a double feature there, right?
Might as well start there, right?
That is one entity. Like, that is one entry.
Yeah.
So that's how we are treating this.
Yeah.
So
I guess on that note, let's say this for Steven Spielberg, he's got in 1993 Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. In 2002, he also has Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report.
Yeah,
those are 2 entries.
That's 2 entries. Yes. Yeah. So 1993, 2002, 2 different entries as far as this list is concerned. Hopefully that brings some clarity as to what we're doing here. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and get to our 10 here. Speaking of Coppola, I think it's fair to say Godfather Part 2, The Conversation, probably in the 10.
That's in the 10.
Yeah.
if for those listening who have been active listeners of the InSession Film Podcast for a while, You may recall that JD and I like The Godfather Part 2, but we don't fully love it as much as others. We definitely prefer The Godfather Part 1 over Part 2.
Yes. Yeah.
But the scope of that movie and how it was able to come out in the same year as another one of Francis Ford Coppola's greatest movies, I think the conversation is top 3 for him easily.
Oh,
That's
I
just
agree.
an incredible feat in and of itself to have 2 directorial efforts like that are just so massive and complex and enveloping as they are.
Yeah, The Conversation is one of the best films of the 70s. It's one of Coppola's best for sure. And as Brennan noted, I don't love Godfather Part 2 as much as everyone else, but we're certainly willing to recognize its historical legacy and that a lot of people do hail it as one of the best films of all time. So
yeah,
those 2 films as a pairing those 2 coming out in the same year is pretty wild.
I agree.
That's insane.
So yeah, we'll definitely have Francis Ford Coppola here. I think another one that we have to have in this list is Ingmar Bergman, 1957. Yes. The Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries came out in the same year, and an argument to be made that those are his 2 best movies.
Yeah, I agree.
They might actually be my 2 favorites of his. I know a lot of people love Persona, but I
just
love
his
2.
Look, I don't know where they would rank necessarily among, let's say, my personal top 50 of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I deeply love both of them. I think they're full-on 5-star masterpieces, The Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries. You could make the argument that both of those films are among the top 50 best films ever made, of all time. Like, and the fact that they came out in the same year is just absurd.
From the same director.
Just absurd. So yeah, that easily on the list is
magnificent, absolutely magnificent. All right, so we've got 2 on the list. Maybe we should jump right to Steven Spielberg, because I feel like he's sort of one of the more cited examples of this thing happening, 2 films in 1 year. And the one that people do cite the most is Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. You have one of the most massive blockbusters ever made, coupled with a Best Picture winner. Many people consider one of the best Picture winners of the 90s, maybe even the best one of the 90s. So I think that at least needs to be considered. And I don't know, JD, I think we can consider both of Spielberg's examples here as part of the top 10.
Yeah, see, the Spielberg of it all is going to get real interesting, because I think looking at it from like just a pure, I say this loosely, like just like a pure objective lens, I think both entries are probably top 10. The only thing that gives me pause is, do we want to double dip on the Spielberg when there's certainly many other entries here that are worth talking about or considering?
That's the thing. It's a great question. But at the same time, it's like, why shouldn't we double dip? You know, if it truly is one of the better double features when compared to some of these other filmmakers, maybe spreading the wealth is not necessarily the best option. So I guess we can talk about it here and acknowledge it, but maybe we should try to fill you make a good point. Let's maybe try to fill the 10 and see if there's room to put both of Spielberg's double features on here.
Because I will say there are obviously other filmmakers that are worthy of being here. Generally, though, and I pose it as a question because I don't know if we're going to walk away from this without having both of those Spielberg years in there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But is there a world, is there a possibility we can walk away from this with only one Spielberg and highlighting 9 other filmmakers? But
this is where it'll get interesting. Maybe we should save this conversation for later as to which of the 2 Spielberg double features we would include, because I think that would be a very fascinating conversation if we decide we only want to make room for one of them.
Okay. All right, we'll circle back
we'll
to
pause.
Spielberg.
We'll pause.
Spielberg will absolutely be a part of this. It's just a matter of how much he'll be
how much and which ones.
Exactly. How about Hitchcock? You have Rear Window, Dial M for Murder. Now, Dial M isn't maybe as highly regarded, but I think that's still a really great film. And then you have Rear Window, which is, often hailed as one of his best films.
Yeah, I think this one should absolutely be here.
Okay.
I was about to say a very controversial hot take, but I don't know if I'm going to. I just introduced it.
Okay.
I'm going to say it. I think I slightly like Dial M for Murder a little bit more than Rear Window.
Oh, okay.
But
I think generally that's hot takey, yeah.
I think they're both upper tier Hitchcock. I just think Dial M
yeah.
for Murder, which doesn't often get talked about as one of his best, that is one of the most fun Hitchcock films ever made.
Oh, it's
That
great.
is a riot of a movie. And the fact that it came out in the same year as something like Rear Window, which is a very different tonal experience, it still feels of a piece with Hitchcock's sensibilities. That's an incredible feat in and of itself.
Yeah.
I think Hitchcock should definitely be included.
I will say I probably do prefer slightly, ever so slightly, Rear Window. And that's a film it's not just a great Hitchcock film, but I think that's a film that has aged gloriously and holds up really well today, given where we are as a society. But I will say Dial M for Murder is absolutely one of Hitchcock's best films for sure. And that final shot is one of the most satisfying of all time in that film.
I agree.
It's
I can agree with that.
so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's not talked about as much as Rear Window, but I think it's very much in that same echelon for sure. So I'm with you.
Yeah,
those two Hitchcock films absolutely belong in the 10. I
agree.
say.
All right, so let's put that one in there. How about, okay, we already talked about his name quite a bit. How about Steven Soderbergh?
Yeah. Yeah, I like Soderbergh.
I like
love
him too.
Soderbergh, actually.
I think he's good at his job. And his most common example for this exercise would be in the year 2000 with Aaron Brockovich and Traffic. One of them he won Best Director for Traffic. But I guess you can also count Presence in Black Bag now.
You can? Yep.
I mean, given how close in proximity they came out from each other, I'm almost tempted to say I think that's the better double feature, the more recent one. But you also have two of his most celebrated movies from the year 2000.
Yeah.
So from an objective lens, I think that maybe that one should at least be considered here.
I'm kind of torn, if I'm being perfectly honest with you.
Far as like which of these two double features is the one to consider?
Okay, yeah, look, you and I have gone back and forth on 2000 Soderbergh. We just had this conversation actually last year when we did our 2000 retrospective. I am much higher on Traffic than you. You're much higher on Brockovich than I am. Yeah. But collectively, we're high on both of those films, you could say.
Yeah, we like both of them quite a bit.
However, I feel like you and I align maybe more on Presence in Black Bag.
Man,
it's
that's the thing. Is it about the alignment between you and I, or is it about which do we feel is the better and smoother and overall greater double feature experience then?
Yeah. And it could be maybe like Presence and Black Bag are so fresh on our minds that could linger on some sort of bias. And to your point a moment ago as well, and I don't want to overlook it, the award success, the Oscars that came from both of those films in the same year, is noteworthy.
Yeah, that's the thing. They are among his more celebrated movies, which is why we should probably consider that. And here's the other thing: we joked about this just before starting this whole exercise. What if Steven Soderbergh has a third movie this year? Then it completely nullifies this in a way.
That's true.
Perhaps
That's true.
Our safest bet is to just go with Soderbergh, but specifically for Aaron Brockovich. Traffic.
And that is fair. I mean, because you think about all the nominations he got from both of those films, they are highly celebrated, and collectively we are high on them in a weird way. So I think that's fine. I think we can at least agree he probably should be in the 10.
Yeah.
So
okay. So
that's
we
in
have
the 10. So that gives us 4.
Well,
five with Spielberg. If you want to count Spielberg.
Five directors, because we have Francis Ford Coppola, Ingmar Bergman, Spielberg, Hitchcock, and Soderbergh.
Yeah, I wasn't counting Spielberg yet.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, but we know we're including.
But
him.
we know we're going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't counting that quite yet, because
Okay.
I want to see how far we get before we're like, no, we'll double nom Spielberg.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. That's fair. That's fair. All right.
All
Well,
right,
we're doing good so far.
those
So who
four
else?
are for sure in. Where else do we want to go?
This is where it gets
let me
tight.
ask you this. What do you think about Weird Science? How do you sit on that movie?
Meh.
Okay. Because here the reason I ask, like, I don't dislike that film at all. I do think it is by far a downgrade from The Breakfast Club. However, I do like Weird Science. It's just not The Breakfast Club.
Sure.
The Breakfast Club, though, for me, is the best film of 1985. And that's why I would highly consider.
So the
John Hughes
weight
for
of that film is what's making you consider that. Okay.
Yeah. And again, I don't dislike Weird Science. And because we're going to talk about, or you look at some of these other nominees that are potentially here. I think this is where the double Spielberg nomination will come into play, because for many of these other potential nominees we have here, this is going to be the dilemma, I think, is one film clearly sits above the other. How much weight do you put on that is going to be the debate.
Yeah. I think
And
that's fair.
ultimately, because of that split, that's where the double Spielberg could come in. However, when it comes to John Hughes and his 1980s output is really fantastic. And I do like Weird Science. It sounds like I like it a little bit more than you, but
I think it's okay.
The Breakfast Club is, that for me is one of the best films of the 80s.
I don't disagree with that. I guess the thing is I'm really trying to find which double features feel the most consistent or balanced in quality. That's what I'm trying to prioritize. And maybe that's where we have some slightly different criteria here. Because for so many of these, it will be about how much weight we put on one film over another. And if that's enough to, qualify it then. So with John Hughes, I'm putting a question mark on him personally at this point. I wouldn't be opposed to including him if we feel comfortable given the rest of these filmmakers that we haven't quite talked about yet.
Okay.
But I do think The Breakfast Club is so good, it almost feels unfair to not consider that within this exercise. Like, I don't necessarily disagree with your overall point there. So maybe at least for now, let's talk about a few of these others. There are many filmmakers here. I wonder if there's anyone else here that has maybe a more balanced release where you almost sit there and think, how could this filmmaker make two great films like this in the same year? And the next one that comes to mind is maybe Mel Brooks, 1974.
Yeah, honestly, looking at the list, I would say Mel Brooks is the only one on here that feels like a solid. There's not as much debate here. Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, absolutely. I have
some of the most celebrated comedies of the 1970s.
Absolutely. I think it would be ridiculous for us to leave that out.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Glad that was a very short conversation on Mel Brooks.
Like, that was never a question. I just wanted to get to John Hughes, but Mel Brooks, absolutely. That was always going to be a part of the 10 as far as I'm concerned. So it sounds like we're in the same boat there.
I think John Hughes, talking about him is a great transition point to talk about many of these others where I feel like it's going to be a weight exercise. Because a director like Ridley Scott, for instance, in 2001 released Black Hawk Down and Hannibal. In 2021 released The Last Duel and House of Gucci. Yeah. And those are complete comparables with John Hughes as far 100%. As one of those movies in each year is clearly better than the other one.
Yes. And that's the thing. Like, Ridley Scott is a great filmmaker. I love Ridley. In some ways, this is a microcosm of his career. I don't know if I would take any one of those, if I'm being perfectly honest.
I don't think I would, because each one you have what I think is one of his better movies, maybe even one of his
100%.
best, coupled with
Yes.
one of his worst.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I say that for Hannibal. I think Hannibal's
Hannibal's not great. And
No.
House of Gucci is a little bit like The Breakfast Club and Weird Science, although I think I prefer Weird Science over House of Gucci. Like the disparity for
Sure,
John Hughes
yeah.
isn't nearly as high for me, but it's
Yeah.
it's along those lines. And I agree with you. The Last Duel and Black Hawk Down is some of Ridley's best.
I agree.
But Gucci and Hannibal, not
I think
so
kind of
much.
brings
And
it down.
I think there's more consistency with some of these others.
I agree. More consistency with someone like Spike Lee, 2020, The Five Bloods, and his musical documentary with David Byrne, American Utopia. That's a very
Yeah.
consistent one, but it also raises a question because they're very contemporary movies. They're newer films of his. Does the amount of celebratory value that some of these films have, is that something we should consider over that? And this is, it's. I think it's a very fair question, and I'm kind of jumping around here, so forgive me for this, but I look at someone like Spike Lee, 2020, one of the more consistent double feature outputs that we can consider here. But is it as celebrated as, let's say, Akira Kurosawa? In 1950, Kurosawa releases Rashomon and Scandal. And then in 1957, Throne of Blood in the Lower Depths. Kind of a weighted thing there too. Rashomon, one of his most celebrated movies, maybe not so much Scandal. And then Throne of Blood, one of his most celebrated movies, maybe not so much The Lower Depths.
Exactly.
We're
We're gonna run into this problem a couple of times.
I'm a huge defender of The Lower Depths, and I also think Throne of Blood is one of his best movies. So if we were to consider Kurosawa, I would say 1957 gets the edge for me over 1950. Although I do love Rashomon, I absolutely love Rashomon.
Yeah, I love
that's
Rashomon
hard.
as well.
That's hard.
Yeah, I haven't seen The Lower Depths, though. That is one of my blind spots here.
Gotcha.
So that would come down to us prioritizing your thoughts on that film over the rest of these.
Yeah. So again, another question mark, I guess.
Another question mark. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Scorsese in 2019. The Irishman, I'm real high on. Rolling Thunder is a blind spot for me, but
it's minor Scorsese as it's an experimental documentary, and it's a very interesting movie. I like this double feature quite a bit, but I just don't think it quite has the celebratory value of some of these others that we should probably consider over it. And that's the thing. We have to really consider the films themselves as opposed to just the filmmaker. So just because he's Martin Scorsese, I don't know if we should just automatically put him in this list for this specific exercise. Yeah.
And I agree. Before we decide, okay, we have to double nominate Spielberg, I have a few more I want to ask you about.
Okay.
What do you think about Oliver Stone? JFK, The Doors, two of his most notable films for sure. Do you think that should crack? Like, I think both have their issues, but I think on the whole, I think there is a consistency there. I do like both of them on the whole.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this is one where we have to put our film critic hats on and just say, yes, this one should be on here.
Okay.
And I also say this as someone that actually really likes The Doors. I think I like that one more than most people, but I do recognize as a music biopic, it has some issues. But at the same time, given Val Kilmer's performance in that movie, there is something that has been worth celebrating regarding that film's status and its existence. And JFK also being a huge hit for what it is as well. So I think that one should qualify. So perhaps of these remaining ones, the one that jumps out to me the most is Oliver Stone to add to the list.
Yeah. Honestly, I'll separating Oliver Stone's nonsense like as a separate thing. I do like this pairing. I'm with you on The Doors. I think it is a really good movie. Maybe we do like it more than a lot of other people do, but I like the ambition of it. I love the performances. And I just straight up kind of love JFK. Regardless of how factual or non-factual it might be. It could be utterly garbage in terms of its historical accuracy.
It's just an entertaining movie, man.
Yeah, there's just something about the convictions and brazen confidence of the film that makes you believe that what you're seeing is what actually happened, even if it's entirely exaggerated, if that makes sense. I love that. I think the storytelling is sharp. The performances are great. The urgency and the pacing is really felt. I think it's fantastic. I don't think it's a perfect movie, but it's one of those I would probably still give 5 stars on Letterboxd. Like I just kind of love
just
it
for
that
entertainment
much.
value, for how long that movie is. If it's on TV, if I put it on streaming, I'm watching the whole thing.
I'm watching. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it is a very thrilling movie.
Yeah. Again, I don't care how fabricated it may or may not be. It's just great cinema.
I agree.
And that's what I love about it. And I really like The Doors. So as far as consistency goes, I think I'm with you. I think this is one that I think should be on here.
Okay. I agree. So that means we have 6 confirmed on this list. 7 directors, if we're considering Spielberg. We'll just see if we're going to include him twice or not. What about your boy Jeff Nichols?
Well, that was going to be the next one I was going to bring up. I wanted to offer up JFK and The Doors. I think there's obviously more of a historical legacy to those movies.
Yeah.
And it's been surprisingly almost 10 years from Midnight Special, not quite. But we're getting closer to 10 years. Midnight Special will never have any sort of historical legacy. Loving won't either. I don't even know if Jeff Nichols as a filmmaker will have much cultural of an imprint.
No.
However, personally, that's a very different story. And
this is your movie. This is absolutely your movie. Midnight Special is specifically.
Midnight Special is one of the best films of the 2010s for my money, obviously. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And I really like Loving a lot as well. I think that's a good movie.
Yeah.
So I think
they're both
the
very good
options
movies.
that we're looking at here, I think I would put it on the list. But that's just my own personal bias, perhaps speaking.
I think I might agree with you because, if we're looking at the consistency of it all, it sort of reminds me of what I just talked about with Spike Lee, The Five Bloods and American Utopia. Very consistent offerings. But I think I think that consistency is just a little bit tighter with Jeff Nichols in 2016. And I actually quite like Loving. I think that's a very good movie and was somewhat underappreciated when it came out. I think it has some really good things in it. Midnight Special, I think, is, of course, a very special movie for the InSession Film Podcast because of what it means to you specifically. So it almost feels rude to not include it just for you.
Yeah, I know. I understand that we're kind of in a bubble when it comes to that movie, but I will always champion that film. I will always go to bat for it. I think it is truly one of the best films of the 2010s, of the 21st century so far.
Yeah.
And I do feel like more and more people are coming around to Midnight Special. I have seen way more of a positive response to it over the last few years, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know if people will ever get as high as I am on it, which is fine. I don't think people have to get to where I'm at with it, but the idea of people coming around on it at all is exciting. But I do think both of those films are underrated, and there's certainly a consistency there because I'm with you. As I noted, Loving is also very good.
Yeah.
So
I don't think Midnight Special will have the same level of reappraisal as something like Spielberg's AI has over the past 20 years. That'd be cool if it did.
I think the only way that'll happen is if somehow Jeff Nichols can break through into the mainstream.
Yeah, and then the normies are able to find that movie.
Yeah, and then once more people catch on, in the same way that we're now seeing with Sean Baker, for better or worse. But when Red Rocket came out, when the Florida Project came out, Sean Baker was a name that you and I knew, that cinephiles and critics know.
Yeah.
But the mainstream audience had no idea who he was. They had no idea what the Florida Project was in 2017. But he breaks through with Nora. Now he's well known. He's a commodity, and who knows where his career goes from here. If Jeff Nichols could have that same narrative at some point.
Yeah.
And if he does, if he breaks through, has a film that wins some Oscars, maybe over time, Midnight Special gets picked up and has an AI kind of narrative to it. But it's going to take something like that to happen.
Yeah.
But
it absolutely is. Okay, so I'm okay with including Jeff Nichols because I think the consistency is there. So if I look back at these, I know we talked briefly about Akira Kurosawa already, and I mentioned that I actually do quite like the pairing of 1957, Throne of Blood in the Lower Depths.
okay.
But I don't know if I like it more than maybe some of these other offerings have as far as consistency. Now I don't know. Let's say hypothetically, if Akiru and Rashomon came out in the same year, that's number one. Like that's automatically number one.
Oh, easily. Yeah. No, I hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like part of me is just trying to fight the more logical side of my brain and the more emotional side of my brain, considering that Akira Kurosawa is probably one of my 5 favorite filmmakers. He's probably a Mount Rushmore director for me. So that's where I'm so torn, but I think I have to put the film critic hat on and tighten it a little bit more and say, I think there are others we should consider over Kurosawa in this case.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, again, I haven't seen The Lower Depths, so I will leave that to you. Obviously,
Yeah, it's an effective movie.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm with you in terms of Rashomon, Throne of Blood. Those are easily in the conversation, but it's a pairing. We have to weigh the pairing.
It's a pairing. Yeah, I'm with you, and I think there are stronger pairings that we should consider here.
Yeah, and that's where we're kind of left with Steven Spielberg. He has his double pairing, and the way this is going, I do wonder if both of them are going to end up on the 10. But
let's quickly talk about some of these others that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, and see if that's true. Joseph Mankiewicz, 1950, All About Eve and No Way Out, one of them being a Best Picture winner. Admittedly, I have not seen No Way Out, so I don't really know about that one. I don't know if you've seen that one either.
I haven't. That one is unfortunately a blind spot for me as well.
All right, so so sadly, I think we have to nix that one. For those listening, I'm sure we have a lot of fans out there who are big defenders of Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, I love Villeneuve. He's one of my boys still. I love Denis. Enemy is great. I love Enemy.
That's
Prisoners
top 3.
I really like, but admittedly, if I'm looking at my Denis ranking, Prisoners will be lower on the list for me.
I hate Prisoners.
I know. We've had this debate before. I don't know if we have to litigate it again, but
I'll
Brennan
just say
and I
that,
do see the ending of Prisoners very differently. We do not agree on that at all. So,
but it sounds like we at least agree that the pairing of Enemy and Prisoners not as strong as maybe some of these other ones.
Not as strong as some of these other ones. I mean, that one is going to be a little bit more consistent for me than it is for you, but this is a collective ranking, so we have to consider that as well. And given that you're really low on Prisoners, that does kind of hurt the Denis Villeneuve chances here. And that's perfectly fair. That's reasonable. That's how this works. That's the fun of doing this exercise. Is it is a collective ranking.
It is, yeah. So we have to try to find ways to agree, and thankfully we tend to agree very easily.
Yeah. So that's fine. I mean, I'm willing to leave off Denis, especially because as I look at these, we talked about Ridley. I don't really love either of those as a pairing.
Same.
I don't love the Scorsese pairing.
Same.
We cannot include, as much as I adore All About Eve, we can't really include Mankiewicz. Spike Lee, we've already talked about. Now, we haven't really got into Linklater, Werner Herzog, or Sidney Lumet yet. But again, I go back to John Hughes. That pairing is just blaring in my ears. It is a signal to my eyes. I'm looking at these pairings and it's standing out to me.
Let me think about this. I think there's an argument to be had, or to be made rather, that the John Hughes pairing makes more sense than some of these other ones. Whether I even like Weird Science all that much or not, these movies still had a cultural impact on what high school 80s comedies were. Now,
Well, and that's the thing, right? Yeah, that's a great point. It's similar to what we were talking about with Oliver Stone and the cultural impact of those films, or even Soderbergh. Now, we debated whether we go with 2000 or 2025, and maybe in another year's time, we'll look back into this and go, we easily prefer 2025 to 2000 collectively, even though we still like those two films from Soderbergh. But you can't deny the cultural significance of both of those films of the 1980s. And I do really like Weird Science. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to you debating the weight of Weird Science for you comparatively to some of these others. I think that's kind of what this is going to come down to. Because for me, I would, as we're talking here, as I look at the rest of this list, it's honestly, I don't even know if it's close.
As we're talking here, I just want to bring up a few additional examples that I was trying to find last minute to see if we accidentally forgot anybody. And there are a few we did forget, but I don't think they're going to crack the top 10 for us. So in the year 2000, Robert Zemeckis releases both What Lies Beneath and Castaway.
Okay.
But again, that's a weighted exercise. That's very similar to the Ridley Scott examples that we highlighted earlier, I think.
Yes, I agree, because I think we can both agree one of those films is much, much better than the other one.
Yeah. Clint Eastwood, 2008, Gran Torino and Changeling, which I don't think is that's a no for me as well. I like Changeling a lot more than you, and I think you like Gran Torino a lot more than me. It's another one of those mismatches as far as
not enough to be on this list, though.
Yeah, I at least wanted to acknowledge that there might be some we overlooked, but even talking about them out loud here, I think we captured the core 10 in some way. I think we have them. And honestly, JD, I'm trying to do a running list here. If I were to add John Hughes, we have 10 options here, including John Hughes, if we were to consider Spielberg twice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I that's exactly where I was kind of leading. I think we have kind of narrowed it down to the 10.
I think we have.
Because I do like the two from Linklater in 2001, Tape and Waking Life are two films that I really like.
Yeah, they're
from
interesting.
Richard Linklater. They're interesting, compelling films on their own. Should they, as an entity, as one entry, crack this list? I don't think so.
Yeah, at this point now, I feel like what we'd be doing is essentially putting a filmmaker in here just because they're missing, and I don't think that's fair to this exercise.
I agree. Same thing with Werner Herzog. As Rescue Dawn, Encounters at the End of the World as an entry wouldn't crack the 10 for me.
It's a pretty consistent entry, though. They're both very effective films.
I agree. I like those movies as well. I just don't know if they would crack this particular 10.
And honestly, talking out loud, really, the last spot for me came down to either John Hughes or Spike Lee. And I think you made the proper argument that John Hughes, and just given how these two films made an imprint in 80s comedy culture, I think that's enough to consider it now.
I agree. Yeah. And the other thing for me as well, and this is where I'm perhaps in a minority here. I don't love American Utopia as much as everyone else does. The Five Bloods, I think, is really great. American Utopia, I think, is fine, but it doesn't move the needle for me at all.
Well, the other thing with that, is that really a Spike Lee film? Because it kind of feels a lot like a David Byrne experience, because it is. It's a Broadway show that he put on that was filmed on Broadway by Spike Lee. But, I mean, Spike Lee does add a few of his touches to it to make it his own, but not as much as something like The Five Bloods, which is
Mhm.
1000% a Spike Lee joint.
Exactly. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's why Spike Lee doesn't quite register with me in this specific context as much as I love The Five Bloods. And then the only other one on this list that we haven't talked about is Sidney Lumet, and I haven't seen The Offense, so I don't.
Same. I like Serpico, but I haven't seen The
Serpico,
Offense.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll have to leave that off. So unless there's any blind spots that we have missed, I think we got a lot of the big ones. I think we're down to our 10.
I think so. So let's rank these.
Okay. So now that we've got down to the 10,
this is where our own subjective thoughts are going to come into play a bit heavier. It was more of an objective exercise trying to pick the 10. Now we got to rank them.
Yeah.
I think there's a clear number one.
You thinking Coppola or Bergman?
Bergman.
Okay. That's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, I think that's a clear number one.
Okay. So we have Bergman at 1. I like that. Okay, so what are you thinking for number 2 then?
I mean, I can understand an argument that number 2 should be Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
Just given the fact that he had 2 Best Picture nominees in the same year. One of them ended up going on to win Best Picture, and that one is also considered to be one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah.
It's
kind of silly when you say it like that, and then we're like, no.
Well, again, you and I don't fully love The Godfather Part 2 as much as most other people. Like, honestly, if I were
think that's so funny though.
If I were to rank Francis Ford Coppola's films, Godfather Part 2 wouldn't even make my top 5. I much prefer Apocalypse Now, The First Godfather, The Conversation, Rumblefish. I like a lot more. Dracula, I even think I like a little bit more because I think it's at least interesting. I tend to like Coppola when he's a bit more interesting, when he takes those swings. And he does do that with The Godfather Part 2. I just don't know if the balance between prequel and sequel fully works in that movie. But it's hard not to say it shouldn't be in the top 2. So maybe we do. Maybe we just put it in the top 2. You just put it. Yeah,
I think we could, simply because The Conversation on its own.
That movie is so good. It is so good.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely fantastic. And again, I think I can step outside of myself and recognize The Godfather Part 2 for what it is in terms of the zeitgeist. So like, and those 2 films, and they were both nominated for Best Picture in the same year. I mean, that's just, it's insane. So like, I think having that at 2 is fine, despite how I feel about Part 2. And I am a little polarized on it as well, but
yeah,
I think that's fine. I think we can have those as the top 2 for sure.
I can agree with that.
And then from there, are you thinking one of the Spielbergs, perhaps?
I almost feel like the Spielbergs can be back to back on this list.
Okay.
Now, this is again where we kind of have to separate our critic brain from our emotional brains. There's one of these Spielberg double features I much prefer over the other. When I say much prefer, I mean I'm splitting hairs because they're both in the top 10. I love both of these examples and both of these pairings. But there's one I do like a lot more than the other, and something tells me it's not the same one you're thinking.
We're going to split here. We are 100% going to split here.
Yeah.
Which is maybe why we should just put them back to back, because
that's why I was thinking that. That's exactly why I was thinking that, just to avoid the argument.
Yeah, and I knew it as soon as we just landed on they both should be here, and I do agree with that. We talked it out. I agree they should both be here, and as soon as we landed there, I knew this was the only inevitable outcome here.
Yeah.
Because I do prefer the Jurassic Park Schindler's List duo. Catch Me If You Can, I love. I'm not as high on Minority Report as you are, but I do like it. I do have my qualms with it though. But still really good. Really good. But I do think, and also List and Park, you kind of have, it's a little bit of the zeitgeisty Conversation Godfather Part 2 thing as well.
Oh yeah, it's definitely more of a comparable example to that.
Yeah.
I would say Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report don't quite have the same celebratory value as that other pairing does. The interesting thing, though, is that though that pairing from 2002 is more of a legit pairing because they almost feel like a true double feature. They were part of Spielberg's unofficial Running Man trilogy, and they feature people on the run in a varying kind of way. So it almost feels like they were designed to be companion pieces, which is kind of intriguing.
But that's what makes the Spielberg conversation so fascinating to me, because on one hand, you do have two films that are more of a companion and very similar to each other in a way that is very effective. On the other side of that coin, that I think is equally as captivating, is that Jurassic Park and Schindler's List could not be more opposite from one another.
Well,
and they came out back to back in the same year. Like, that to me is also
and one of them
mind-blowing.
sweeps the box office and the other one sweeps the Oscars.
The Oscars. Just insane. Like, Spielberg just comes along and goes, I can do it all. I'm going to take all your trophies and all your money.
This is, and maybe this is why I have to separate my own emotional brain for a second, or at least not focus on that, and just look at how in 1993 Spielberg basically created the most obvious example of hold my beer. Basically is what that is.
Yeah, I can do Prestige, and also I'm going to make one of the best blockbusters of the 90s, if not of all time. And also change the game as far as CGI is concerned. And the CGI dinosaur in Jurassic Park still holds up tremendously and maybe even looks better than a lot of CGI today. And that film came out 30 years ago.
I think you can remove the word maybe. It does look better than everything else.
Yes.
Okay.
30 years ago.
That's
wild.
I'm not going to push back on that. We can put that at number 3 as long as you're okay with putting his
we can
2002 pairing
we can do them
number
back
4.
to back. Yeah,
because I truly love Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report. I personally prefer those films over the other pairing, but I can agree the other pairing is the more celebrated one, and you can't overlook that.
Okay, so that's our top 4 then. Where do we want to go with 5?
5, I feel like, should either be Hitchcock or Soderbergh.
Okay. Can I throw a little bit of a wrinkle in there?
Okay. I'm curious who that is.
I'm thinking Mel Brooks.
You know, he was the other one. As I said that out loud, I thought, you know what? Mel Brooks perhaps has the more consistent pairing with two of the more celebrated comedies of the 1970s. Okay, Mel Brooks can, and these are not just celebrated comedies of the 1970s. These started a trend.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not necessarily pushing back against Hitchcock either. Rear Window, Dial M would be a solid 5. But I think Mel Brooks is very much in that conversation. In fact, and again, maybe this it might slightly come down to our disparity on the Soderbergh of it all. But I think I would prefer Hitchcock and Brooks over Soderbergh.
I would too. I think I'm okay. Okay, so we have Bergman at number 1, Coppola at number 2, Spielberg at 3 and 4 respectively. Then Brooks at 5, Hitchcock at 6, and Soderbergh at 7. How's that sound?
I like it.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that a lot as well. And then that leaves us with Stone, Nichols, Hughes, and that's it. That's it.
And I think the way you just said that is the way I think it should be ranked. Oliver Stone at number 8, Jeff Nichols at number 9, and John Hughes at number 10.
Okay. I can live with that, yeah. I think that's our 10 then. Okay, so to recap, we finally did it. We got to our 10.
We did.
Ingmar Bergman at 1 with The Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries. Then Francis Ford Coppola, 1974, The Conversation and Godfather Part 2. Steven Spielberg, 1993, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List. Spielberg again, 2002, with Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report. 1974, Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. Then Alfred Hitchcock, 1954, Rear Window, Dial M for Murder. Then Soderbergh, 2000, Brockovich and Traffic. 1991, Oliver Stone, The Doors and JFK. 2016, Jeff Nichols, Midnight Special and Loving. And last, John Hughes, 1985, The Year of My Birth. Good Lord, I'm old.
Oh, I guess it should have been higher now that you say it that way.
Breakfast Club and Weird Science is our 10. So those are our pairings. Our director, 2 films in a year. However you
that's-
want to label this.
I'm happy with this, JD. I'm happy with this one.
I am too. I think this turned out really great. So,
And then, of course, if Steven Soderbergh releases a third film this year, he'll just top this list.
yeah, and it's possible. We talked about this way back in January when we did our 2025 preview show, that there is a third film. I forget the name of it now. I'd have to go
The
back. and look at my
Christophers,
list.
I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where that sits in terms of post-production. It would be really funny if it did come out sometime later this year, though. Would be hilarious, but
That'd be great.
we shall see. Either way, if you agree, disagree with our list, let us know. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on, or if you're listening, on Spotify or Apple Podcast. You can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right, let's talk about coffee. It's my favorite.
So good.
Can't
How-
survive without it.
How much did you drink in Disney?
You know, I didn't drink hardly at all. And I think that's probably why I came home so incredibly exhausted. I've never been more tired in all my life. I mean, obviously, you're walking around Disney
Yeah.
through the parks. I have 2 children that I have to look after. That certainly adds to the exhaustion as well. And I had almost no coffee for 3 or 4 days, and that has never happened before in my life.
You're on withdrawal. You're on withdrawal, man.
I mean, today I made up for it, let me tell you. But man, I missed
17
it.
cups
I
of
missed
coffee.
I missed my coffee call at Disney. And part of the reason is, and I don't want to get into naming names, Disney has a coffee. They have it all over the parks.
Oh, yeah.
You can find it in the rooms. Not a fan. Just not a fan. It's not
That's fair.
that velvety, rich coffee cult specialty grade coffee that I love.
It's not
just
that
not that.
authentic. It doesn't taste pure. It just doesn't have the purity,
it's not the
right?
Same. It's
Yeah.
just not the same. Like Coffee Cult has such incredible, like the textures of it, the flavors of it, all organic. They don't do anything to enhance the coffee. They just source specialty grade coffee from all over the world. They take extra measures to make sure all of the green coffee is perfect. There's no defects at all in any of the coffee. It's all pure gourmet specialty grade coffee.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it elite. And you can
Absolutely.
really taste it in the coffee. You don't need to add milk and sugar. You don't have to, like, it just has these incredible natural flavors
Yeah.
that can be fruit forward depending on the coffee, or it can be nutty and velvety and
It's like
chocolatey.
it's like a dessert in your mouth. It takes
so
so
good.
much work to perfect, so much work to get it right, that it makes it even better when Coffee Call actually, sources the right workers and pays their workers and farms so appropriately, especially women,
that's a
when
big
actually
thing as
making
well.
this. It's ethically sourced and ethically made.
Yeah, and that's part of why we love the coffee. So you got to go check it out. That's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF25. Again, that code is ISF25, and you'll get 15% off your order there. Go check it out. It's truly one of the best coffees you've ever had. You will not be disappointed, I promise. Coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about protection.
Security. It's
You
the name of the
need to be secure. If you're traveling,
this digital age, man. It's a dangerous
Yeah.
place.
I just went to Disney. That's not overseas.
No.
But if I was going to, let's say, the Disney in Paris or the one in
Man.
Tokyo,
Yeah.
and that's
yeah.
on my bucket list. That's something my wife and I want to do.
Same here. Yeah,
sometime.
maybe we'll go together sometime, and we'll have to keep
Yeah.
ourselves secure when we're
Exactly.
logging online doing our InSession Film duties. We'll need NordVPN to back us up.
Exactly. It's so fast and secure. It protects us from prying eyes online by changing our IP addresses. It secures online traffic through encryption, making it hard to spy or hijack your data, which is what we all want and need in our lives.
Yep, and it's available on all operating systems as well. Smart TVs, routers. Their Threat Protection Pro feature helps to block malware and ads and malicious sites and trackers, which is the name of the game for many of these malicious sites and these malicious scams that you're getting out there. NordVPN is adamant about keeping you safe from them, so much so that it was even picked as the best VPN by PC Mag, Forbes, Wired, and Tech Advisor, among many other outlets as well.
Absolutely. With 7,200 servers in 118 countries, the options aren't endless. The speeds are remarkable. And if that wasn't enough, NordVPN does not track user activity. They have a customizable kill switch. If anything is to get disrupted, they have your security in mind all of the time. So it's the best VPN out there. We have a link in the description below. Click on that link and you'll get your first month of NordVPN for free.
Yep.
Click on the link, first month for free. Stay connected wherever you go. Have peace of mind. Listen to the InSession Film Podcast all across the globe.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. That is the real reason to have
That's
it.
the real
right?
reason. Exactly. And we thank NordVPN for their support. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and transition to our Best Picture movie series. We are now on to the year 1963 as we talk about the Tony Richardson film Tom Jones. This is coming off the heels of The Apartment, West Side Story, and Lawrence of Arabia. That was a hell of a run for the Academy, 3 years in a row, starting the decade off excellently.
Wasn't it more than 3 years in a row? Didn't we talk about that with the year 1959? It's not
I'm
part of
just
the
talking about
series,
the
but
context
still.
of the 60s. Yes, if you want to go back to the 50s, you can go back to Ben-Hur as well, and many of the 50s films. We'll get to the 50s at another time.
We will.
But in the context of the 60s, the decade starts off really, really well with those three winners. And now we are here to Tom Jones. So as we noted at the top of the show, this was a blind spot for both Brendan and I. This was a first-time watch. Are you ready to get into this one?
I am, and I will just have to say before we get into this, for the longest time, I thought this movie was about the Welsh singer Tom Jones, who sings What's New, Pussycat?
Oh, God. I had no idea what this was about. I walked into it completely blind.
I knew enough about what it was based on. At least I never read the novel that it's based on, which was called what was it? The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling, by Henry Fielding, rather. Haven't read it, but I know it's a very celebrated book from the 1700s.
Yes. It's also worth noting that Tom Jones, regardless of where we sit with that, and I honestly have no idea what Brennan thinks of it, but this film did get nominated for 10 Oscars. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, as we debated this last year with Emilio Perez. Sometimes a film can be completely undeserved with its nominations, but it did get nominated for 10. It won 4, obviously Best Picture. It also won for Best Director, Adapted Screenplay, and Original Score. And it has been hailed, at least within the British film scene, as one of the best British films of the 20th century. So
yeah,
it has a reputation. It has a legacy. So,
it has an interesting reputation. It's also one of the few Best Picture winners I can think of that's also part of the Criterion Collection.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
With that said, let's go ahead and get into this. Tom Jones. It is directed by Tony Richardson. It stars Albert Finney, Susanna York, Hugh Griffith, Edith Evans, Joan Greenwood, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film, including, and I don't know how to say the name, but there's a narrator that is quite prominent in this film, Michael McLemore. I totally butchered
Nice
that.
try.
That
Nice
was
try.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. But I at least wanted to shout him out because we do
Yeah.
hear him quite often in the film.
We do. That's right.
If you're not familiar with Tom Jones, it is the romantic and chivalrous adventures of adopted bastard Tom Jones in 18th century England. All right, Brennan, what did you think about Tom Jones?
I'll just simply say this. I'm weirdly glad this is a movie that is a Best Picture winner, especially for its time, because this is a weird movie. This is a very strange movie. It's admittedly a movie that didn't fully work for me. I wouldn't be surprised if I give it another go sometime. I might like it more because that way I'll be more on its wavelength and what it's maybe attempting to do. I guess I just wasn't prepared for how farcical this movie was going to be. That was the thing that took me by surprise the most. And I kind of have to respect its farcical energy, its manic energy. In many ways, it feels like it is predating sort of the British comedic sensibilities of something like Monty Python in a way. It kind of has a very strange slapstick energy to it. I don't think the comedic energy and the story underneath fully meshes. I think it's a movie that is kind of try hard, but I kind of at least respect the attempt to do something like this before it ever became a thing. It's just for those of us in the film critic sphere who see a lot of movies, I can't help but feel like other movies, like let's say Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, would perfect this only 12 years later, this kind of thing. I think as a movie, this thing visually is pretty shoddy. I don't think it's a very good looking movie at all. The camera is constantly jittering. And I don't think that really does the movie any favors, especially given how they're trying to focus on natural landscapes and natural lighting to capture the authenticity here. At least I think that they do. Even director Tony Richardson has apparently said in his own autobiography he wasn't really happy with the movie. He's apparently been very adamant about
I did see
the
that
production.
quote.
He's been very adamant about the production feeling kind of rushed and him not being fully satisfied with how the final product came about. And as someone who didn't really know that history and only saw this for the first time a few days ago, I could sense issues in the production of this movie. It did feel like a slapstick affair, not just in the tonality of the movie, but in the execution of putting it together. Very, very hodgepodge, I guess is the best way to put it. So I think it's a mess. I think at times it's pretty charming, mostly because of the actors in here, and we'll certainly talk about that, I'm sure. But I think it's a severe downgrade from the movies that we talked about already in this series.
Yeah, that is exactly how I wanted to start my opening thoughts. I am not sure there has ever been a bigger downgrade in Academy history going from Lawrence of Arabia to Tom Jones. Coming off the heels of Lawrence of Arabia and even West Side Story, it's not entirely crazy as there is a bigness to Tom Jones in that it's this sweeping adventure movie with lavish period aesthetics and production design. Simply from a craft and scope perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And clearly that was the trend in 1963 with America, Cleopatra, How the West Was Won. They were all grand epics in their own right. So the Academy at that time was clearly salivating for these kinds of movies. And given that the last two winners were an exquisite musical and a serious biodrama, I can see why they wanted to go back to something comedic in tone. The problem is that there should be an asterisk next to Beauty and the Beast for being the first animated film for Best Picture, because Tom Jones is a cartoon.
It's very much a cartoon. It absolutely is.
It is 100% a live action cartoon. The way it moves, the way it's edited, the choreography, the setups and payoffs, it is all inspired by Looney Tunes. R.I.P., by the way. If you've seen recent news.
Yeah. Thank you, Max.
Yeah, it's such a goofy Looney Tunes-ass movie, Tom Jones is. Now, I don't say that disparagingly necessarily. I actually think there is some fun to be had here. Albert Finney is really funny and charming. His chemistry with Susanna York is really great. Joan Greenwood is a ball of fun. Some of the voiceover narration is clever and amusing. The way it breaks the fourth wall is really great. Those moments come at the perfect time in the narrative. So don't get me wrong. I don't think this is the worst Best Picture winner by any stretch of the imagination. I just think it's insane that a live action Looney Tunes movie won Best Picture. But I'm also saying this in a year where the Academy awarded a titillating romp like Anora Best Picture. And that's also very diverting in tone.
Yeah.
So
So
what do
anything's
I know?
possible, I guess.
Yeah. The difference for me, it just comes down to quality. I think Tom Jones is a fine movie. It's funny. It's playful. Its mock seriousness is particularly humorous given its competition and all the films around it that won the Best Picture Oscar. But there are limitations to that in execution for me. I don't think the film ever gets more than a few feet off the ground, if that makes sense. So
It does, yeah.
it's an interesting Best Picture winner. I'm glad that I saw it, but even with its competition, and I haven't seen all 5, but of the few that I have seen, I am a little surprised that this did win Best Picture. But to your point, it does, at the very least, make it one of the more bizarre Best Picture winners. And that gives it a fascinating legacy.
Yeah, it's an outlier in many ways. And not only that, like I said in my opening thoughts, I feel like this film is doing things that almost predate what would be commonplace in many other comedies that would follow in the 1970s onward, especially British comedies. I mentioned Monty Python. It's all over this movie. Even the way the fourth wall is broken, I can't help but wonder if Woody Allen was a fan of this. There are similarities there. So I have a lot of respect for a very weird movie like this being this celebrated. And that's why I called out the Criterion Collection, because Criterion has a habit of picking the weird stuff sometimes, right? to add to the collection. And if they're going to go after movies that won Best Picture, they're going to go after something like this more so than Lawrence of Arabia. They absolutely are. It makes absolute sense, for better or for worse, however you want to see that. But yeah, I don't think this thing fully comes together. It feels like it's trying to do a lot. You mentioned how it breaks the fourth wall. You mentioned how cartoonish that it is. It's also trying to be pretty substantive as well. It's trying to have some commentary about the idea that Tom Jones himself, as a bastard, kind of straddles this line between royalty and peasantry. He has this middle ground, and he actually, in Albert Finney's performance, emphasizes both qualities: the goodness of the normal man, but also kind of veers back into the corrupted side of the royal man. So like he straddles both lines, and I think that's pretty fascinating, especially given how charming and compelling Albert Finney is in the movie. So it's trying to do all of these things, and I just don't think the balance is quite there, which is why I do think it is a severe downgrade from the movies that we talked about here. I think if it were at least more consistent, I'd be happier with a movie like this winning. But it does feel like a hodgepodge affair of trying to do something new and interesting that I can respect at the time that it tried doing that. But that's the best I can say about it, honestly.
And that's where the conversation around this film, I think, is interesting to me, because if you remove the Best Picture element, and we've had this conversation a lot in recent years as far as awards, turning it into sports, how that disrupts the discourse. Because so many films, whether they're in the awards conversation or not, you can have a compelling conversation on its own terms. Like, meet the film on its own terms. Let's have an interesting conversation about what it's attempting to do, where its ambitions lie. Is it effective? The moment you filter it through the lens of awards, and look, this is a Best Picture movie series, so we can't fully separate it from its awards context. If we do that, though, with Tom Jones, for the reasons you just noted, I do think this is an interesting movie.
Yeah.
But as I noted in my opening thoughts, I think it has its limitations. So as a Best Picture winner, I do find it disappointing, I guess, from that perspective. I don't think this reaches the heights of a lot of Best Picture winners. I haven't seen them all, obviously. We've only covered up to this point, 14 films, right? We did all of the 1940s. We've done a few here in the 1960s, but I've seen many, many more that we haven't covered yet in this series, and we will at some point down the road. Of the Best Picture winners I've seen, it's not at the very bottom, but it is going to be lower on the list because I do think this film has its limitations with its execution, its sloppiness, as you were talking about earlier, and I do agree that the execution here is very uneven. However, if you separate the awards context and you just remove the filter of Best Picture and the Oscars, and that it won that prestigious award, I do like what the film is attempting as far as its examination on morality, how that intersects with social and like virtuous structures of the time of the 18th century, and where Tom Jones kind of finds himself in this middle ground between high class and lower class. And you look at the debauchery that he kind of that defines him throughout a lot of this film. What's interesting is that it really has nothing to do with his social standing or even his appearance of which class he comes from. He's very consistent in who he is. But amongst his debauchery, he's also kind-hearted. He's very nice to people. Like, he goes out of his way to help people a lot as well. And so it's a film that wants to disrupt the status quo as far as how you're supposed to behave, you know, given who you are, where you come from, and how you look. And that idea, I think, is just as applicable today as it was in the 1960s when this film was made, or the 18th century in which the time this is depicted. So I do like that. Is it a little uneven execution? Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
but
for sure.
It's ideas on class and identity and who Tom Jones is, how the film goes about, again, in a very Looney Tunes kind of way. Those elements I did admittedly enjoy.
I did too. And I think that idea of disruption is very important. And that's why in my opening thoughts, I said I kind of appreciate this as a Best Picture winner in a way, because it sort of disrupts what the Academy was normally going for at the time. In a way, I think I would like, I hate to say it this way, and that's actually not what I mean. I was about to say, I think I'd like the movie less if it didn't win Best Picture, which is not true. But I think the movie would be a little bit less interesting to talk about if it wasn't a Best Picture winner, because it has this status of a movie like this, as strange as it is, especially at this time. This is what won Best Picture after Lawrence of Arabia, not Cleopatra, which feels like it should have been the winner, not How the West Was Won. It was this little Looney Tunes of a live action movie that acts as a disruptor and really doesn't fit the mold of what an awards movie felt like at the time. And that makes it such an interesting movie as a piece of history, as a relic, if you will. And I think I'm appreciating this movie more as that relic than I am an actual movie, which is not really fair to the movie. But I think that's what makes it kind of interesting, especially knowing, like I said earlier, that Tony Richardson himself wasn't too happy with the final product. The movie does feel meshed together in the last minute. It feels like a movie that was basically put together in the editing room and not very well. And I find that kind of funny. I really do.
I agree. And I do kind of wonder if that's why the Academy went for it, because as I noted in my opening thoughts, the previous two winners, and I really do wonder if this was in play for voters, because you have this exquisite musical, West Side Story. It's impeccably choreographed. The dance numbers are revolutionary. The music is extraordinary. It's a really fun, epic movie. And then the following year, you get Lawrence of Arabia, one of the best shot films of all time, this grand sweeping epic. And then here comes Tom Jones, which at its core is somewhat of a film that wants to deconstruct the seriousness of those kinds of movies.
It kind of does, and that's why I made the comparison to something like Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, which is doing that same thing, but in a very subtle way that you might not notice it, in a more artful way. So it's not apples to apples for sure.
Yes. Barry Lyndon is way more sharp and incisive in its craft and filmmaking.
Yeah.
And that's like, again, I call this a cartoon. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I don't necessarily mean that derogatory. It's kind of a fun element of the film. Again, it has its limitations, especially if we're comparing the greatness of Best Picture winners or any kind of movie, really. But this is a live action cartoon. That is how this was crafted. It was crafted as a silly Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah. There are sequences here where characters look in the camera, breaking the fourth wall, and the movie literally freezes its frame to focus on that breaking of the fourth wall, and it is so silly. It is so silly.
It's so silly. I mean, the setups to some of these gags, the reveals of those gags, the payoffs, it functions very Looney Tunes-esque. Some of the dialogue is so absurd and over the top. And it's goofy. I think of that moment of Tom, and I'm trying to think I think it was Mrs. Waters, and they're having this seduction dinner scene that is admittedly very funny.
The food just keeps changing. Yeah, I love that.
Keeps changing. And
I love that.
it's
Unspoken.
so
It's but again, like a scene like that feels kind of familiar to me, as if it maybe set a bit of a trend of similar comedic gestures and stylings that would come later. So I kind of have to give this film credit as a Best Picture winner for maybe spearheading a few things that would be perfected in other movies later on.
Yeah.
And I admire that. I really do.
Well, and going back to the scene, because I also wanted to highlight part of its goofiness is the way it is edited, the way that it is shot, and even the sound design of it. And again, you go back and you watch films of this time, and quintessentially, given that we're doing this series, you go to Lawrence of Arabia, which is the pinnacle of cinematography, sound design, performance, all of the above. This film, Tom Jones, from a cinematography perspective, is borderline atrocious compared to.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. And I think
Lawrence
that's
of Arabia.
purposeful. That's the thing.
And that's what I'm building to, because I would also say the same thing about the sound in this film is really bad.
Yeah,
the sound is not good. And I think those elements, to your point, is kind of purposeful. And again, I go back to that seduction dinner scene, and the cinematography is greasy. It's got these incredible, almost uncomfortable close-ups at times. It does offer this discomforting sensation. And then you add in the sound design, which has these exaggerated sounds of chewing and slurping that adds a grotesqueness to the moment, but it's also funny given what the scene is trying to accomplish. So the cinematography and the sound is not good on purpose. And that, again, just makes it this interesting relic. I don't think it makes for a good movie per se, but it does.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of is deconstructing the self-seriousness of some of these other Best Picture winners, especially a few kind of pre-leading it, which is maybe why they went for it at the time.
I think I think it was a palate cleanser for them.
It was a palate cleanser in many ways.
Yeah. But yeah, this is clearly not a movie that's taking itself seriously, even if it does have some serious themes on its mind. I mean, Tom Jones himself, I believe it's his nephew, the character of Bliffle. That's what I was about to say. Like, some of the character names here. It's clearly not a movie taking itself seriously. His nephew's name is Bliffle, played by David Warner, and what I believe was his first ever appearance in a movie, which is actually kind of interesting. But then his two henchmen are names what? Square and Thwackum. It's like that's pretty funny, but it's clearly an indicator that this is not meant to be taken seriously. And I think that just happened to be the thing that the Academy was going for after not even just 3 years in a row, probably 6 years in a row of huge epic Best Picture winners, because West Side Story, Lawrence of Arabia, you mentioned those. The Apartment, a bit of a smaller film, but still has a grandness to it because it is so emotionally grand. Before that was Ben-Hur. The Bridge on the River Kwai was 2 years before that. So I think they needed something like this. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why it feels like such an outlier of its time. It does such a great job of just being this buffoon comedy that is really funny. And yes, it does have some captivating themes that it does take seriously, that is interwoven into its comedic tones in a really great way, as we talked about. Like I do like how sensual the film is. There are a lot of sexual politics at play. I don't think all of it holds up well, but it is really interesting and subversive for the most part. There's so much innuendo in the film that is really interesting, and it's fascinating to see how the film tries to upend itself at every single turn. You know, I think I mentioned earlier that Joan Greenwood is having a lot of fun in this film as Lady Ballaston. And that's an interesting moment in the film because that's a character that has a status, right? She has power over Tom, and she uses that to entangle him in this interesting way, given his reputation and, of course, his charm and his looks. And she does it in a way that kind of twists him away from Sophie, who he's trying to pursue in this film.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see the political and social maneuverings there. That is not what you would expect of the time period, and tropes that these period dramas tend to portray.
Yeah.
And it does it in this really fun, playful way that I really like. But again, all of that stuff has limitations for me. Like the way it's executed here has limitations for me. It doesn't have the smart or sophisticated comedic and capabilities, that we've seen with other great comedies over time, especially when I look at the next year with something like Dr. Strangelove, for example.
That's a more perfected example of this kind of farce, I guess. Yeah, it absolutely is. This movie has conviction. I will give it that.
Yeah, I agree.
It's very flawed conviction. I have to wonder that if it came out in any other year, even if it were the 1960s, like let's say a few years afterwards, this probably would not have won. I feel like if hypothetically this came out after Doctor Strangelove, I don't think this movie would be celebrated as much as it is. I think that's just the thing. It came out at the right time.
At the right time.
I do love Edith Evans in this movie. I agree with you there. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for it. This movie received 5 nominations for acting. Like that's insane. 3 of them were for Best Supporting Actress. It also included Diane Salento and Joyce Redmond. And all of them are, they're committed to the bit that they're asked to do. I just think it's astounding that a movie like this had 5 nominations for acting, 3 of them in the same category. Like that's just something you rarely see. And if you do see that, it's for a movie that seems obvious that would happen to. This does not feel like one of those movies to me. I just find that really intriguing.
No, I agree. It is a bit bizarre. Maybe 1963 was a little bit of a down year.
Different flavored water.
It was, and look, I have to be very careful with my tone here because I think a film like Coda gets way too much hate than what it actually deserves. I think Coda is a good movie. I really enjoyed it a lot. And honestly, I think there's a lot to compare with Coda and Tom Jones. in the sense that
Sure.
perhaps a lot of the criticisms that they receive have nothing to do with the film themselves, but the fact that they won Best Picture over other films that were maybe more deserving. Because I think Coda is really good. I think it's wonderfully performed. I love what it's tackling in terms of its own themes and what it means for today's society as well. I think that is a good movie. Did it need to be a Best Picture winner? No. Did it need to be nominated for Best Picture? No. If it just lingered in the background of its year, people would have liked the film for what it was, could have enjoyed it for what it was, and all would have been forgiven. But the fact that it won Best Picture now puts it on a pedestal, and we're even seeing this with Anora a little bit in recent weeks and months as well.
Mm-hmm.
It has a bullseye now, and people love to take their shots, and it drives me crazy.
This Best Picture win for Tom Jones kind of reminds me a little bit more of when Chicago won Best Picture. A film that's also comparable in its vibrancy and its energy. One's a bit more based on its musicality than the other, but I think there's still a superficial comparison to draw there. And Chicago, I think, is a movie that came out at the right time when people realized, oh, movie musicals can actually look like that. Okay, we're going to honor that. It's a great example of how a movie can come out at just the right time to set the right spark. And full disclosure, Chicago is a film I don't really like that much. And
I don't love it either.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about Tom Jones in that I understand when it came out is maybe more important than what even came out in the first place. And I think that's really the basis of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Tom Jones needed to be in an awards conversation by any stretch of the imagination, but like Coda, I do think there is much to appreciate here on its own terms.
It's an interesting movie. It's an interesting movie.
I just think there's limitations to its execution because it is messy. It is a bit uneven, but I love its thematic angles. I love its characterizations. The performances here are really good. It blows my mind that Tony Richardson won for Best Director because this is not even, especially, and again, admittedly, I'm willing to throw in that we're watching this off the heels of Lawrence of Arabia, of West Side Story, even The Apartment, which isn't as grand in its storytelling, but
it's not an epic, but it's a big movie.
It's a big movie, and Billy Wilder's direction in that film is extraordinary. Yeah. It's very, very good. The direction of Tom Jones is all over the place.
It's shoddy. It absolutely is.
Which is, like, I agree with Tony himself. He has said that this is not a good movie, or at least it's not as good as its reputation. Like, he has said that himself, and I agree with him. He shouldn't have won the Oscar for Best Director. That is wild.
At least he's humble. At least he's humble about it.
Yeah. But I don't think he's wrong either. I don't know if he's being humble or if that's just an honest reflection of the work that he did. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I don't think he's wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think he's wrong either.
Best Director is, like, I think that's more insane than the film winning Best Picture, if I'm being honest with you. Like, that's crazy.
Well, because it does feel like one of those examples of a movie that would go on to win Best Picture, but the Academy would still honor Best Director with maybe the more technical achievement of the year. This doesn't feel like one of those movies that were to win both. And it's kind of hilarious that it did.
Yeah, it is wild that he won for director. But I can see why the film resonated because it's pushing back against a lot of what came around it for the reasons we noted earlier. And I love its subversions in that regard. So
yeah. I love the idea of what this movie represents.
I agree. Anything else to add? I don't know if I have anything else to add here.
I don't think so. I will say, of the movies it was nominated against, this is perhaps the year where I'm going to say I have the most blind spots and can't really compare it to Tom Jones. I know we talked about this a little bit on last week's show, I think. But you have seen Cleopatra. I have as well, but it's been so long. I don't even know if I can.
And I was drunk out of my mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that. And then for me, I don't even know if I sat through that movie that's a hard movie to sit through in one sitting in general, but I don't even know if I saw it from beginning to end.
I think I saw 4 hours. I do not remember that film being 4 hours.
See, neither do I. That's why I think I may have seen this movie in like alternating pockets. Like my first viewing of it may have been the second, third, or something, and then my second viewing was just watching the first 20 minutes. Then maybe I watched the last 20 minutes, and then maybe I watched the middle 40 minutes or something. I think it was one of those cases, which means I can't really say I've seen it. I've just seen most of it. There's a big difference. But what I've seen, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if I were to go back and watch all 5 of these nominees, including Tom Jones. This seems like it could have potentially been a pretty weak year.
Yeah. I from all accounts, and I haven't seen all of the films from 1963, obviously, but I did do a little research, and that was a bit of the consensus that I did read, is that 1963 was a bit of a down year. But I think it's interesting, coming off the heels of what we said last week with Lawrence of Arabia, and perhaps setting a little bit of a trend as far as audience reception, Academy reception, these long epics that are grand in spectacle.
Yeah.
America is, I believe, 3 hours long as well. Yeah, that's 174 minutes. We just mentioned Cleopatra was 4 hours. How the West Was Won is 3 hours as well. Three out of the 5.
This was a thing.
Tom Jones was 2 hours and 8 minutes, I believe. So it's not long. It's not 3 hours, but it's not exactly short.
It's normal movie length.
Normal movie length. Lilies of the Field, the 5th nominee here, that was 90 minutes. That was by far the shortest of these nominees.
Watch that be the best one for us if we were to go back and watch.
Would be hilarious. I haven't seen it, but that would be funny.
But I think given the time frame of when this all came out, the Academy probably saw that and thought 90 minutes? Nah, we can't award that one.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's coincidence. I don't know if those films were made with Lawrence of Arabia in mind and the success and the Oscar wins that it had, and those films trying to mimic that. A lot of those films were being made as Lawrence of Arabia was winning, so it might just be coincidence. Sure. But it seems as if Hollywood at that time was wanting and aiming to make these big grand spectacles, which I do think is exciting in a way. I do want Hollywood to do more of that today. We are never going to get that because
that's the thing.
They can't handle it. But
in a way, I think I'd rather see a bunch of these failed spectacles that still look and feel like movies than what we're normally getting, right?
Yeah, I agree. Sadly, I think Oppenheimer is going to be an outlier. It is going to be its Lilies of the Field. I think it's just going to be the
anti-lilies of the field.
The anti-lilies of the field, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oppenheimer, good movie.
Yeah.
This one, not so much.
I mean, and that's why you cherish Oppenheimer. I loved The Brutalist. That was another long epic from last year. So maybe we'll get more of them, because The Brutalist did fairly well during Oscar season as well.
It did.
It was no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. So between The Brutalist and Oppenheimer, maybe we'll start to get more. I don't know. But at any rate, it was certainly the trend in 1963. And I do find that fascinating.
I do too. As a Best Picture winner, it definitely tells an interesting story.
Yeah. Look, I liked a lot of what Tom Jones is doing. When I meet it on its own terms, not necessarily as a Best Picture winner. I don't love it as a Best Picture winner. But when I just meet the film on its own terms and the way that it explores identity and classism and morality especially, and those kind of, like how all of that is interwoven here, there is fun to be had. There's a lot of empathy with Tom Jones and the way he reacts, and he's caught in all of these weird situations that he doesn't always put himself in, as I noted with one character, he becomes entrapped in a lot of this as well.
Yeah.
And it does a really good job of bringing sophistication to that character. The problem for me is it's always going to be the limitations. I think it's Looney Tunes aesthetic and execution is just, it's going to limit that film for me.
Yeah, so this is available on Max.
That's the only thing.
This is available on Max, and if you want to watch Looney Tunes on Max now, just watch Tom Jones instead.
Just watch Tom Jones, yeah. Because it is a goofy movie. I mean, I can sit here and talk about its moral convictions and the way that it examines classism. Like, we can talk about that stuff all day long.
I don't think the film wants us to, though. That's the thing.
And here's you have to take that and put it into the small little box in the corner and just kind of keep that in mind that's what the film is exploring.
Sure.
And if you haven't seen the film, I cannot prepare you enough for how goofy this film is. It is extremely, extremely loony.
It's a strange and weird movie.
It's strange.
I'm glad we saw it. I'm glad we saw it for this one.
Yeah. It was quite the experience. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we are now 4 films down through the 1960s. And then next week, we get to 1964 with My Fair Lady. Winning over Dr. Strangelove and Mary Poppins.
So, I'm just going to say it now. It's already the wrong winner.
Yeah, look, My Fair Lady would have to be a grand masterpiece to beat Dr. Strangelove or Mary Poppins for me. And I don't think it's going to get to that threshold. I don't think it's going to.
Nope.
So,
That's what I'm going to say. Nope.
It's already working against itself. But we'll talk about it next week.
We will. It's a long movie, too. It's another 3-hour movie.
Oh, yeah. So be prepared. Another long epic.
We should have thought about that before picking the 1960s for this next series here.
Yeah, The Sound of Music, that's not a short movie. That's also 174 minutes. Goodness great. A Man for All Seasons. Let's look it up real fast. Oh, it's a short, brief 2 hours.
Short and brief and 2 hours in the same sentence. Wow, what era are we living in?
I know. Wild. The early to mid 1960s, they just wanted to make 5-hour movies all the time.
Absolutely.
At any rate, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right. As we wind down here, just a reminder, we have 2 reviews coming out. We have Steven Soderbergh's Black Bag and the Russo brothers. They made a new movie. It is called The Electric State.
It's not good. It's not good.
Boy. Look, I am not on that review, but I can only imagine that your guys' conversation similar to mine.
It was pretty polite.
Was it? Okay.
Not positive, but polite.
Yeah, that film is absolutely atrocious. And you know what's crazy about The Electric State? That film is not just derivative. It's not just banal and lazy. I mean, it's all of those things. But what encapsulates that the most for me is that they took the villain from Transformers 4 and put him into this movie.
It's one of the best things about it, though.
Same character, the same actor, the same character. They're like, we're just going to take Age of Extinction. That's this movie.
You know, we're living in a very new era of blockbuster filmmaking when Transformers Age of Extinction is your inspiration.
Goodness gracious. Like, just no inspiration at all with that film. Oh,
It's not good. It's not good. And we talked about it quite heavily, really around its budget. Honestly, that was kind of the biggest talking point with that movie.
I don't know if you guys talked about the Russos they were revealing they used AI for voice modulation.
We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but that is very heavily featured in the news now. You're right.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it to me, because everyone got all up in arms with The Brutalist. And I think, like, I'm on the side of it wasn't all that meaningful. They used it for 1 or 2 sentences in a 3-hour movie. Right. They wanted to get the Hungarian accent more correct. That's all that film was doing. The performance is still very much intact as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if I can say the same thing about The Electric State, because the character that Anthony Mackie is voicing, you can't hear Mackie in that performance at all.
No, not at all. That's a very rude casting job right there.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's casting as much as it is the AI voice modulation.
Well, that's why well, I say rude because it's almost like they just simply cast Anthony Mackie for his voicing mannerisms. It feels, to put it bluntly, and I don't mean to get into sociopolitical angles with this, it feels like they just wanted to cast a black actor for their dialect and then manipulate it in AI. That's what it feels like to me.
That I agree with. That's how it feels, which makes it way more egregious to me than what The Brutalist does.
Oh, I agree. It's worse here. Absolutely worse here.
I don't think Mackie's performance is intact because you're removing Anthony Mackie. You're just using a certain dialect, to your point. Yeah, it's not great. I don't see those two things as the same thing at all.
They're not. They're not.
That's a bad use of AI.
One's an enhancement. One's whatever the opposite of that is.
Yeah, exactly. At any rate, we'll have more conversation on The Electric State later this week. You'll be on the lookout for that. We'll have a new Women in Session coming this weekend as well. With all of that said, we hope everyone enjoyed the show. I look forward to continuing the Best Picture series next week with My Fair Lady. With that, go to the movies. Go see Black Bag, everybody.
Black Bag 3 times.
We need more of his movies. We'll see you guys next time on the InSession Film Podcast.